The story of Juana's destiny as Archduchess and Princess in Flanders was soon altered by a series of deaths within her Spanish family. In October 1497 her older brother Juan died at the age of 19, according to what was said due to his sexual excesses with his also young wife, Margarita of Austria. Almost half a century later, Emperor Carlos V, Juana's son, would warn his offspring, the future Felipe II, that he should not commit excesses in the first years of marriage because that had killed the infant Don Juan. A year later, Juana's other older sister, Isabel, who was married to Manuel I of Portugal, died. Her newborn son, Miguel, was left as heir to Spain and Portugal, but died before his second birthday. In this way, in 1500 Juana became the sole heir to the crowns of Castile and Aragon, for which her mother, Isabel, implored her to return urgently from Flanders to Spain. At that time no one questioned Juana's ability to reign. Her temper outbursts were common knowledge, but she considered them a trait inherited from her imposing mother, also prone to bouts of melancholy. Juana's gifts used to receive exalted praise. In 1501, the Bishop of Córdoba, sent by the Catholic monarchs as an ambassador to Flanders, reported that she was considered to be very sane and very established. That same year, the resident ambassador of Spain had gone so far as to say that, "I don't think such sanity has been seen in a person of such a young age." As soon as Juana and Felipe arrived in Spain, Queen Isabel arranged everything so that the courts of Castile recognized her daughter as the legitimate heir to the throne. Archduke Philip, ignominiously relegated to the rank of consort, left Spain 6 months later, leaving his wife pregnant with his fourth child, who was named Ferdinand in honor of his maternal grandfather. Isabella's intention was for Juana to succeed her in Castile as queen proprietor, with or without the support of the Archduke. What she could not determine beforehand was whether both Felipe and Ferdinand the Catholic, who was legally only king of Aragon, would accept such a resolution. The Cortes de Toledo meeting in May 1502 marked a turning point in Juana's public life, since it was then that her suitability to govern began to be questioned. When Queen Elizabeth wrote a last testament shortly before her death, on November 26, 1504, there were serious doubts about Juana's mental health. Although Isabel confirmed her as heir to her kingdoms, in the document she added that if Queen Juana, being in them, does not want or cannot understand the government of them, it would be Fernando who would exercise the regency in the name of she. In a new attempt to prevent a possible usurpation by Philip of Habsburg, the sovereign stressed his status as a foreigner and expressly prohibited the assignment of any civil or ecclesiastical office to people who were not natives of her kingdoms. It doesn't matter that, on paper, the expression, "or I can't," is just an apostille from Isabella the Catholic. It constitutes the strongest sign that Juana's mother now doubted her daughter's ability to govern. Many scholars have argued that Juana's alleged madness was solely due to a male political conspiracy. Since it was an obstacle for Felipe or Fernando to exercise absolute control over Castile, disabling it satisfied the interests of both. Her mental disorder, they allege, was deliberately exaggerated in order to make her unacceptable as a sovereign. It has further been argued that her extravagant behavior was actually a legitimate attempt to assert herself in a male-dominated world. This line of argument makes Juana an exponent of all those women who, throughout history, have been unfairly excluded from power. There is, however, innumerable evidence to suggest that Juana de Castilla was indeed too unstable to be entrusted with her government. Many times it has been argued that Juana inherited her madness from her maternal grandmother, Isabel of Portugal. Although there is not enough evidence to issue a clinical diagnosis, if we limit ourselves to saying that Juana was excessively unpredictable to govern, then the evidence of unusual behavior is overwhelming. The truth is that her attitude was so abnormal that until her last days her family sincerely feared that she was possessed by the devil. It was in the months immediately following Philip's abrupt return to the Netherlands that Elizabeth first seriously doubted her daughter's fitness to rule. Juana's fervent desire to reunite with her husband clashed with her mother's intentions that she learn to govern. The arguments between the two women had a serious effect on the health of both, to the point that the Queen suffered serious chest pains. Juana was confined in the castle of La Mota, a splendid brick construction located in Medina del Campo, where a singular and disconcerting incident occurred. According to Isabel's own account, her daughter Juana was in the outer enclosure of the castle, barefoot and without warm clothes, until 2 in the morning on one of the coldest nights of the year. With this gesture, Juana forced her mother to grant her an interview and, ultimately, to allow her to leave for Flanders in search of her husband, the Archduke, but she achieved her purpose at the expense of her personal dignity, an essential quality in any ruler. In June 1506 another similar incident occurred. She and her husband had returned to Spain in April, 16 months after the death of Isabel la Católica. On June 28, Felipe informed her that he had signed the Concord of Villafafela with his father, which stipulated that if the new queen was unwilling or unable to govern, Felipe would assume full authority and would even continue to be king at the same time. Death of his wife. Fernando promised to retire to Aragon, although he retained half of the income that the New World brought to Castilla, as well as full control over the military orders. At first Juana had been outraged by these negotiations, but then she seemed to pay no attention to them. Instead of speaking out, she only asked to tour the Count of Benevente's gardens, famous for his collection of animals. When she had seen the peacocks, Juana ran away until she came across the house of a woman, a baker by trade. Taking refuge in the kitchen, she resisted leaving it despite the pleas of her husband and the fact that the house was surrounded by Felipe's German soldiers. These two anecdotes shed light on Juana's mental disorders. From the perspective of the 16th century, it is irrelevant whether we define her ailment as insanity or a severe form of postpartum depression. Juana had revealed herself incapable of any strategic thinking. Her mind could no longer go beyond the immediate circumstances. Her only obsession was to feel free, but free for. The sudden death of Felipe el Hermoso, on September 25, 1506, was undoubtedly a tremendous emotional blow to Juana, pregnant with her 6th child. It has not been possible to verify the macabre stories about her efforts to reopen her husband's coffin, while she was moving him from one town to another in Castilla, in order to examine her remains, perhaps to prevent them from getting lost or they were stolen. Rather, it is important to focus on the political aspects of her reaction to the death of the Archduke in Burgos. The next day, when the president of the Council of Castile went to see the Queen, the sovereign herself opened the door of the palace where he was staying, the so-called Casa del Cordon, and told him to come back later. When the members of the council showed up again, they had to chase Juana throughout the house and, finally, dispatch through a gate that connected the chapel with her rooms. By refusing to deal with urgent matters, regardless of whether she was due to lack of interest or illness, Juana de Castilla had once again demonstrated her incapacity for government. In this way, Fernando el Católico took control of the reins of the government of Castilla, in addition to that of Aragon. Upon his death, in 1516, after the brief regency of Cardinal Cisneros, Juana's eldest son, Carlos, would be proclaimed king regardless of the dynastic rights of his mother, who would remain confined to the castle palace of Tordesillas from 1509 until his death. When she arrived in Tordesillas, Juana was accompanied by her youngest daughter, the young Infanta Catalina, and she was not far from the body of her husband, provisionally deposited in the neighboring monastery of Santa Clara. However, her first guardian became increasingly nervous when she refused to cooperate, and in 1516 Cardinal Cisneros dismissed him for mistreatment. Mosen Luis Fer, who was called that, was terrified that the captive would die while in her charge and admitted having used violence on some occasion to preserve her life, since she refused to eat. The second governor of Dona Juana's house, Hernan Duque de Estrada, was a cultured man who treated her with greater compassion. He wrote to Cardinal Cisneros that, if one had some patience, the queen was sometimes capable of prolonged periods of lucidity, although he confessed that, what cannot be doubted is how much it is convenient to reason with love, because if you want to twist her will by force everything falls apart. The most criticized in his role as guardian of Juana was the Marquis of Denia, whose family was in charge of watching over the queen until her death in 1555. Following orders from Carlos V, he restricted Juana's access to any politically sensitive information. For 4 years they did not inform Juana that her father had died. Demia removed the Infanta Catalina from the care of her mother in 1525, and 2 years later she secretly took the coffin of Felipe el Hermoso to bury him in the Royal Chapel of Granada. Against the idea of a masculine conspiracy against Juana, it is worth noting the deep attachment that her family showed her. Between 1535 and her death, historian Bethany Eram has estimated that she received at least 16 visits from her children and her grandchildren, some lasting several days. Everyone sincerely believed that Juana suffered a derangement, and it was even suspected that she was possessed. Toward the end of her life, her family began to worry that the Queen's soul was in danger. She didn't want to eat, she didn't comb her hair, she didn't even clean herself or get dressed, and she stubbornly refused to hear Mass. Since 1534 her son Charles had tried in vain to get her to confess. In 1554, Francisco de Borja, a Jesuit and former Count of Gandia, was sent to Tordesillas by the future Philip II with the mission of finding out why he refused to go to church. The clergyman reproached the Queen for living without attending services or having sacred images in her private rooms, reminding her that her grandson was now King of England and there was still a risk that Protestants in the country would publicly declare that their faith did not differ from that of England. Hers, Juana claimed that the women of the Demia family were hindering her religious life and, after accusing them of being inveterate witches, she demanded that they be investigated by the Inquisition. Juana I of Castilla died on Good Friday 1555, at the age of 76, after having been confined for almost half a century. Francisco de Borja testified that her last stammering words had been, "Jesus Christ crucified, help me." Juana fought throughout her life to be a good daughter, wife and mother. She accepted that she frequently fell ill and that, when she did, she was incapable of ruling her multiple realms. The greatest tribute that her story can pay her is to recognize her weaknesses.